Tarasha. It is an honor for me to outline the objectives of the 2 days national seminar on India's maritime culture, continuity and change. India's engagement with the seas has spanned centuries ranging from the ancient docks of the Indus Valley and the maritime prowess of the Cholas and Kalingas to the present-day national deployments in the Indo-Pacific. This enduring legacy is not merely a matter of history, but a living, evolving force that continues to shape India's geopolitical identity, economic future, and regional influence. The core objective of this seminar is to bridge the rich cultural continuum of India's maritime history with the emerging strategic imperatives of our time. It aims to stimulate informed dialogue across disciplines and stakeholders, naval professionals, academics, historians, strategists, environmentalists, and policymakers. We aspire to reclaim the historical maritime consciousness of India and its influence across the Indian Ocean world. Engage critically with the role of maritime culture in shaping India's diplomacy, trade, and security architecture. Explore how traditional practices, literature, and archaeological findings inform modern maritime governance. Promote integration between coastal communities, academia, and national defense institutions. Encourage youth participation and scholarly engagement with maritime issues. To achieve these goals, the seminar has been structured into 8 thematic sessions spread over 2 days, each delving into key dimensions of maritime culture and policy. Day 1, the session 1 starts with Legacy and Sovereignty, India's Maritime Heritage Through the Ages. It traces India's seafaring lineage, maritime empires, indigenous shipbuilding, and historical naval leadership, including figures like Chhatrapati Shivaji. Session 2, Webs of Influence, Maritime Trade, Diaspora, and India's Soft Power. It explores India's cultural outreach and the spread of diaspora through maritime trade and how soft power is anchored in historical maritime links. Session 3, Sea Power and Security, India's strategic posture in the Indo-Pacific. It focuses on India's maritime doctrine, strategic forays in the Indo-Pacific, coastal security, and multilateral cooperation. Session 4, Harnessing Blue Economies, India's Oceanic Development Models. It examines marine resource utilization, the blue economy, coastal development, marine biodiversity, and shipbuilding traditions. The day concludes with a cultural evening hosted by Indian Council for Cultural Relations, ICCR, Ministry of External Affairs, celebrating India's oceanic ethos through music, dance, and performance. Day 2, 25th July 2025, Session 5. It's on shoreline resilience, maritime communities, and risk preparedness. The session analyzes the inclusion of coastal populations in national preparedness, disaster response, and the integration of various agencies like BSF, Coast Guard, and NDMA mechanisms towards ensuring a strong resilience. Session 6, Corridors and Connectivity, Maritime Security and Economic Diplomacy. The session investigates strategic corridors such as the Kaladan project, inland waterways, and coastal states' role in advancing maritime security and trade. Session 7 is Collective Horizons, Maritime Security in the Indo-Pacific and Sagar. It covers frameworks like the Quad, India's bilateral maritime cooperation with countries like Japan and Vietnam, and the strategic significance of UNCLOS. Session 8 is on maritime tourism and coastal development. Discusses on sustainable tourism in coastal and inland regions, inland water transport, and innovative development of maritime assets and heritage. This seminar is not just an academic exercise, it is a collaborative mission. SANJOS as a tri-service think tank of the Ministry of Defense, and MACAIS, a premier cultural research institute under the Ministry of Culture, have joined hands with Dayal Singh College to ensure participation across civil military academic dimensions. We are also delighted to host naval professionals from Indian Navy and Coast Guard, scholars from Goa University, Kazi Nazrul University, O.P. Jindal University, IGNOU, Assam University, and Mizoram University. Experts from think tanks such as ORF, RIS, NMF, and representatives from various government agencies. We hope this seminar will generate actionable policy suggestions, inspire research collaboration across maritime and strategic studies, enrich curriculum and public discourse of India's maritime legacy, encourage young minds to pursue careers and scholarships in maritime affairs. The seminar does aim to represent our collective journey through India's maritime past, present, and future. It is an invitation to all participants to not only reflect but also contribute towards shaping the maritime narrative of India as a leading voice in the Indo-Pacific. I thank you all for your presence, and I look forward to an engaging 2 days of deliberation, dialogue, and discovery.
Commandant, Naval War College. Commodore, Indian Navy, Ajay Agarwal, retired. Professor Dr. Vijay Khare, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. T. Thangadurai, Assistant Director, Department of Archaeology, Government of Tamil Nadu. And Dr. Prateek Chaturpadhyay, Kalyani University. Let me introduce the chair. Dr. Datesh Paralekar is an assistant professor of international relations, Goa University. With over a decade of experience in pedagogy, research, and strategic consultancy, Dr. Paralekar's academic expertise spans India's foreign policy and diplomacy, strategic maritime affairs in the Indo-Pacific, West Asian security, the Chinese political economy, and Latin American political development. A former Fulbright Research Fellow, Dr. Paralekar conducted a significant part of his doctoral work at the School of Advanced International Studies, Johns Hopkins University, Washington, D.C. He's a regular visiting faculty at key national defense institutes such as the Naval War College, Defense Services Staff College, College of Defense Management, and College of Air Warfare, Indian Naval Academy, and the Army War College. His strategic insights are valued across academic and policy circles in India and abroad. Dr. Paralekar is also a non-resident fellow at the Middle East Institute, New Delhi, and contributes regularly to global platforms including the Russian International Affairs Council, the Institute for Security and Development Policy, Sweden, and China, Delhi, Hong Kong, in addition to several peer-reviewed publications worldwide. Welcome, sir. Speakers are kindly requested to adhere to the allotted time of 15 minutes. A buzzer will sound 2 minutes before the time limit as a cue to conclude. I now hand over the stage to the chairperson.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. At the outset, I would like to express my thanks to St. Joe's and to Mackay's for this very kind invitation to not just join one session, but 2 sessions. And it's an absolute privilege to be chairing both these sessions when I have some very illustrious and distinguished panelists, both from policy practitioning and also from the academia. Let me also compliment both the Director of St. Joe's, and Dr. Monojit Das for putting together this event over the next 2 days. So what I'm going to do is basically I'm going to set the tone of the proceedings in the next, let's say, 13 to 15 minutes by talking to you in more overarching terms about how do we relate back to our maritime culture and maritime history. Now, as a civilizational nation with a resplendent civilizational antecedents, we always have to hark back to the best inheritance that we have so as to be able to create the trappings and the foundations of a modern, robust, and resilient society. And as we look forward to 2047, we need to look at certain important markers that take us back into history, not dwell in history or remain situated in history, but to process what history has taught us, what are the instructive lessons, and then to be able to filter that into policy and inform the progression of our nation. So I'm going to start with 5 or 6 markers which I see in contemporary India that have a certain harking back relevance. The INS Tarini made 2 circumnavigations across the globe. The most recent one that came back in May. And while everyone has been in awe of what has been done, if you look back into our history and if you look at the incidents and the magnitude of our circumnavigation in history, it should not surprise anyone that we are not only being audacious in our ambition in terms of circumnavigation, but we are also being very benevolent in our accomplishment. In 2017, Rodrigo Duterte, the president of Philippines, when he reached out to Prime Minister Modi and said, I want to prioritize the relationship with Philippines, it wasn't done through the BrahMos. The BrahMos came much later. It was done effectively by him telling Prime Minister Modi, we need to launch and commission a joint project on maritime archaeology, because I have come across definitive evidence of how your maritime imperial voyages were not just in the Malay Peninsula, but that extended all the way out that far out west in the Pacific to the Philippines. And since then, we put together archaeological surveys, and our relationship actually is founded in that affinity that we draw on, where a Roman Catholic country and a predominantly Hindu country is brought together by maritime culture, by a culture of tolerance, a culture of diversity, and a culture of eclecticness. When Prime Minister Modi in 2018 at Shangri-La spoke about India's maritime doctrine and said it's not FOIP, it's FOIIP, with the second I being inclusive, he wasn't simply making a statement. When he went to Indonesia thereafter, he proposed to President Jokowi that Andaman Nicobar and Aceh province must be brought together. We were talking of the stitch ship. Let's stitch these two regions together, because these regions not only have very old affinities that we can see, but also they make a lot of geostrategic sense. And we proposed the Sabang port, and of course that port is now being built. And the whole idea is to link the transshipment container hub that's being created in Andaman Nicobar with Sabang port. And I say this because for a long time in our maritime doctrine, we were constantly harped upon as Indonesia being the extended neighbor. I don't think it's an extended neighbor. I think if this is our thinking, which of course draws on history and our historical linkages to our east, then Indonesia is our next door neighbor. A next door neighbor doesn't have to be only one who shares with you a physical boundary, a land boundary. Somebody who is close to you in terms of a maritime boundary can equally be qualifying as a next door neighbor. When India spoke about Sagar 10 years ago in 2015 and now has called it Mahasagar, we used a very interesting doctrine because this doctrine stands out from any other doctrine. When we say security and growth for all in the region, these two words, security and growth, are not hegemonic in nature. They are benign, they are consensual, they are eclectic, and they are multilateral in nature.
Dr. Padalekar, chairman of the session, and all the distinguished panel members, DG Sanjaos, and all participants of the seminar, and of course, ladies and gentlemen in the audience. Firstly, good morning, and thank you again to Sanjaos for giving me this opportunity to participate here. I would also like to place on record my grateful acknowledgement to the Naval History Division, who helped me in researching and putting together this presentation. So I will be talking about the first before we go into the past, and that is the post-independence Navy. And I will talk through a tale of 20 pictures. Keep it interesting for the audience. Okay. So Dr. Padalekar mentioned, about Chirantar and Nirantar, and there was no doubt that in the pre-colonial period, India was a great seafaring nation. We had a great shipbuilding tradition, and of course, great commerce and trade linkages with all the then civilizational powers. And in that sense, we could say that in the medieval period and before, the Indian Ocean and of course the wider Indo-Pacific was truly a free and open Indian Ocean. So in that sense, what the Indian Navy has attempted to do post 1947 is to reclaim this legacy and restore the Indian Ocean to a free and open nature that had always existed. As Dr. Padalekar said, it was the normal state of affairs before we became abnormal for about 500 years. So in that sense, I would cover how the Indian Navy has gone about this task post-independence in about 4 acts, as a post-colonial flag bearer, the preferred security partner, a first responder, and of course, a collaborative security contributor. So at the time of independence, the Indian Navy was in a bit of strife because at partition, whilst the ships were divided 60-40 between India and Pakistan, a lot of the vital infrastructure as well as most of the trained manpower migrated to the fledgling Pakistan Navy. So therefore, we were literally left with a navy that had more ships than men. But this did not deter our founding fathers. In fact, they were determined to restore the power of the Indian Navy. And the first thing that they did was to buy 2 Royal Navy light cruisers, HMS Nigeria and HMS Argonaut. They were rechristened INS Delhi, who you can see on in this picture here, and INS Mysore. And they became the flagships of the fledgling Indian Navy, showing the tricolour across the globe. In fact, in spite of the unequal distribution, our visionary founding fathers had already decided that strategic air power was also required, and the plans for induction of the first aircraft carrier INS Vikrant were already underway. So after independence, the Indian Navy took her task of maritime diplomacy extremely seriously. It was a time when India was reaching out to all its partners in the Indian Ocean region and trying to act as a force for global decolonization. And this photograph is extremely historic, taken in 1951 on board the quarterdeck of INS Delhi in Mombasa Harbour. And it shows the famous tall Kenyan leader who was ultimately the Prime Minister and then the President of Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta. He was hosted on a reception on board INS Delhi. He was given a guard of honor, and all this happened 12 years before Kenya even got independence from the British. So this showed how the Indian Navy and India had already realized that it was the tall indigenous African leaders who actually represented the African people. And that's why this reception was held. And Jomo Kenyatta famously said, the last time I was on a British cruiser, I was part of the chipping party. You know, the chipping party are the guys who maintain the ship. And this time I'm the chief guest. Thank you so much for your kindness. He was extremely moved. But of course, the colonial legacy could never actually be put to rest until such time that we remove the last vestiges of the colonial power from our own territory. And this photograph of the Alfonso de Albuquerque, who was the flagship of the Portuguese Navy off Panjim when she engaged in a gun battle with INS Betwa and Bias in 1961, was the commencement of the liberation of Goa operations. And that was the time that India actually restored this colonial anomaly through 2 operations, Operation Vijay, which was an armed forces operation, and Operation Chutney, which was exclusively to the naval operation. Of course, chutney being the idea that we'll make chutney out of them, which was actually achieved. And this saw the sunset of the colonial era in India. And then I jump almost 60 years down the line to a very interesting photograph taken of an Indian sailing vessel, INS Tarangani, entering Thames and London Harbour in 2022 as part of the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, 75 years of independence. And what could be more symbolic than an Indian sailing vessel flying the tricolour, sailing up the Thames into the capital of the erstwhile colonial power, truly showing that the Indian Navy had transformed from a colonial offshoot to a globally respected maritime force. Another very interesting photograph taken in 2017 when our then Chief of the Naval Staff, Admiral Sunil Lamba, presented a hydrographic chart of the Gulf of Tanga to the Tanzanian authorities. Now, Tanga is a port in Tanzania, which was the site of a not so well-known World War I battle, wherein the British from Kenya tried to invade the Germans who were in Tanzania. It was a fiasco. Of course, the British lost that battle, but thousands of Indian soldiers sacrificed their lives on behalf of the British. So this was a symbolic gesture almost more than 100 years after the event. The naval chief of an independent India presenting a hydrographic chart which was made by the technological skill of the newly independent Indian Navy to an independent Tanzania thus wiping away the slate of colonialism and also showing that ships and technology alone do not count for a navy. It is also the legacy of those who have gone before us, who laid their lives for the nation. And in remembrance of that, I think this photograph has a lot to say.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, St. George, for giving me this opportunity to be here, Chair, fellow panelists. Let me just go back to almost 5,000 years back and look at the Indian maritime heritage. I have purposely chosen this picture, which is representing an Indian dhow. The dhow is a very common term for various types of ships that were built all around the coast of India. I'll cover that part in my shipbuilding part. But the main thing that we need to look at, because dhows were the ancient beast of burden. When the caravans referred to in the morning by the keynote speaker, that caravans were used, could be used for travel on land. It was these vessels that carried a whole lot of things from one place to another. And then the next thing that I want to connect up with this is the monsoon wind pattern. Actually speaking, the story of India's maritime history, India's maritime culture is very intimately linked to monsoon winds, because monsoon winds is the one which allowed the freedom of navigation, freedom of movement all across the Indian Ocean. And that was something which actually propelled the Indian economy, Indian culture, and so on. So the discovery of monsoon wind pattern could be considered as the most important event occurring in the Indian Ocean region, which influenced India's maritime culture. This included ships, seamen, traders, preachers, ship owners, pilgrims, adventurers, fortune seekers, travelers, buyers, sellers, pirates, persecuted migrants, and created a unique system at sea, which influenced the adjoining coastal areas and sometimes even deeper hinterland as well. The movement of ships propelled by monsoon winds not only carried people mentioned earlier, but also facilitated exchange of thoughts, ideas, material gifts, commercial goods, technology, weapon, beliefs, which included religious beliefs as well, across the seas and the communities, thus creating a unique maritime culture in the Indian Ocean. And India, due to its peninsular shape that you would have seen in the maps projected since morning, was right in the center of it. So then let's look at the phases of maritime activities. About 5,000 years can be broadly divided into these 7 zones or 7 eras. This also gives the idea of continuity as well as the gaps in the maritime activities in India, which shaped the maritime culture. It may be appreciated that maritime trade formed the backbone of the maritime activities in ancient India, which worked on the principle of arbitrage. Now this is very important because, as was mentioned earlier, that trade was free, the seas were free, and therefore arbitrage was the ultimate way of doing business, and Indians were very good at this. So free trade practiced throughout the Indian Ocean region during this period. Then we have the references coming from various languages: Tamil, Pali, Sanskrit, Marathi, Bengali, and also the literature from abroad: Greek, Latin, Persian, Arabic, Chinese, foreign travelers, particularly the Chinese travelers, which was referred to by one of the guest speakers in the morning. Then we have the coins, we have the archaeological evidences, cave paintings. They were referred to the INSV Cordelia, which was the picture was shown in the morning. That is based on the paintings of a cave painting of Ajanta of 5th century, and very importantly a book called Yukti Kalpataru. Yukti Kalpataru is one of the first written references of India's shipbuilding, and it is very important. I will touch upon this point during my discussion on the shipbuilding part of it. So there are several sources, both directly as well as indirectly, refer to the maritime activities in ancient India. As Dr. Palulkar said, we are not very good keeping records, but there are linkages available. They are yet to be discovered evidences which are now being put together, and it is it is emerging that there is near continuity in India's maritime legacy or India's maritime culture. To give you example, that Sanskrit word nava or now is the one which refers as boat, and the word navy probably emerged because of the word nav, and subsequently you can also say that navagati, gati means movement, navagati is probably the one which led to the word navigation. So this is something which similarly you look at kattumaran. Kattumaran is a Tamil word for a small boat, wooden boat. This probably led to the word of catamaran. Catamaran, which is now used all across in all languages at sea.
Chair of the session, Professor Dattesh Parulekar, Rear Admiral Arjun Denane, Commodore Ajay Agrawal, my dear colleague, fellow Tanga Durai, Pradeep Chakraborty, Major General Ashok Kumarji, the DG St. George, my student who did it this role to invite me here, Manjit Das, who did it master in our college, and their colleagues, their students and friends. It gives me great pleasure to be here to take you back to recall the memory, the contribution of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, his contribution for naval capability. In fact, it is very difficult to use or theorize this great man's thoughts in contemporary time. If you did any mistake, it would be disaster in your life as well as everything. So, with taking this kind of effort, in fact, why Mohan Das invited me, 8 years back I started in my department very unique program to understand the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj vision and nation building. That is the first time I developed a postgraduate diploma course to understand Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, his war strategy, his administration, his thinking about naval capability. Then recently, again, when I got a good response from across the different universities, I started unique program on dedicated to only on Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, MA program on Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj vision and nation building. So in this context, this program we are running, and most of the even international students are taking that course, and I'm very happy that in continuing that, I'm just going to speak about how Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj is importance in present time. Before going to his thought, I just briefly divided his contribution in three phases. First page would be his life is around up to 1630 to the 1680, but the first phase, which is very important during the 1645 to 1660, he used the theory called policy of defensive expansion. You all aware that compared to Western kings and compared to Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, he comes from very different area. His area was controlled only in the Pune district, very few districts covered. But during that time, he mobilized his forces, and during first battle with Purandar is a place near to Pune, 1648, 1655 Battle of Vai, and 1658 Battle of Kalyan. These three battles he won it and he mobilized his forces. Then second is a policy of defense offensive, where in the period is called 1660 to 1670, and third is totally offensive policy, which 1670 to 1680. So this is the three important phases need to understand to understand the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj and his contribution in naval capability. In fact, last couple of years or few decades, when you ask any strategic thinker or any strategic think tanks to understand the geopolitics, international relations, and defense and strategic studies, they refer three important theories. One particular talks about Mackenzie's heartland theory, talks about importance of land power. Then second theory talks of E.T. Mahan, who talks about the sea power. And third is a duet air power or space technology. So one talked about the space technology, one talks about land power, and one talks about the sea power. And comparing the land power theory, but sea power theory, what A.T. Mahan proposed the few elements to understand the sea power. What was the reason Britishers or the United Kingdom dominant across the globe? They used the theory of A.T. Mahan to expanded their kingdom or they extended their capability. There are six important elements are important to understand the sea capability, and then what proposed by A.T. Mahan, and before that what Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj proposed that. So I'll just compare. First, A.T. Mahan theory, it's a very important slogan, who controls sea, control the world. And if you go to Mackenzie's heartland theory, which talks about who control heartland, control the world. And Duet talks about who control the space, control the technology, the world. And recently, Operation Sindoor taught us how space technology is important. In fact, drone technology is important. Why from last 3 years, Russia and the Ukraine is fighting to each other because of the heartland. And what is important naval capability? All are really experts narrated about that. What A.T. Mahan talks about, six elements. One is the geographical position. Second is the harbor quality and coastline. Third is the extent of territory. Fourth is the size of population. Fifth is the national character. And sixth is the character and policy of government. These are the six important characters to understand to develop a naval capability, and he propagated this theory in 1890, and that was the time Britishers took that gist and they controlled the naval through the naval capability across the globe.
Good morning, everyone. Honorable dignitaries and participants and professors and students. Presenting Chairperson Dr. Pantulokar and this session. Our topic is maritime trade during Chola regime in an archaeological evidences. On behalf of the Tamil Nadu State Department of Archaeology, we are having as 5 scholars came here participate this topic in our department ongoing 8 excavation in Tamil Nadu nowadays going to 8 excavation. In Tamil Nadu, we are continuing some ongoing onshore excavation also continuing in the coast of the Sangamira, Fort of Korkai to Chola period port city of Kaveri Pumittinam in east coastal area. Now, how trade played on vital role for the transformation of the Indus Valley civilization into urbanization. Chairperson also clearly called not to see large kingdom can see in the small region. Similarly, in Tamil Nadu, domestic trade was carried out from the Iron Age period onward and continuous. Especially in the Chola period, the epigraphical information about the conquest of East Asian countries such as Kadaram during the period under Rajendra Chola can be seen in the inscription portion called as Mai Kirti. Capture the Kadaram. Similar inscription contain information about conquest in the various countries. Next, I would like to invite Ms. S. Subbalakshmi. She will continue the presentation.
Thank you, sir. So, as discussed, we have the topic of maritime trade during the Chola regime. So, the trade which in Tamil Nadu which exists in Iron Age itself, we have the evidence of few excavations which have been conducted in Archimedu, known for its Roman trade connections and the important goods which they have imported from there, like Roman amphoras, and Kavaripombatinam, a major port city during the Chola period, with evidence of trade with Southeast Asia and Mediterranean, and South Alanankulam, a port city with evidence of trade with the Roman Empire and other parts of Asia. So, as we are archaeologists, we always believe on evidence. So, here are the few evidence which we have got from the excavation and through the literary evidence also and epigraphical evidence. So,
Thank you, Dr. Parulekar, for chairing this session and inviting me. At the outset, let me kind of congratulate St. Joe's and Honorable DG of St. Joe's and Dr. Manojit Das in particular for making this happen, because this is, I think, as the first session is showing, it's a confluence of practitioners, academicians and archaeologists bringing all the sectors together to dwell on issues which is very important to us, which is India's maritime culture, continuity and change. By now, as my previous speakers have shown, Indian naval prowess is rooted in its domestic history and in its civilization. What I would like to focus upon is that navy or air power or land warriors, it's all part of the national government, national policy and foreign policy. So what I presume is that we should not be going by this idea that if I am into navy, if I am a good naval officer, if I know the seas, how the sea lanes operate, that doesn't mean that I could contribute to my naval power build-up unless and until I have been given a green signal, a positive signal, and a signal to do something in the sea waters by my government, by my political leadership. So, by domestic roots of maritime policy, I would like to delineate some of the important elements. One is, as I was telling, it is the vision and mission of the political leadership. The other is also the approach of political parties. We are in a democracy and all the political parties are equally have a chance to come to the government at some point of time. I really do not find any kind of initiative or wings of political parties that seriously focus on maritime connections, maritime connectivity, maritime partnerships. They all focus on domestic issues, on domestic policies, but unless and until we are secure from both the land and the water, unless and until we are secured, we cannot have our domestic policies or domestic development. The other would be, and I, for one research purpose, went through the archival data of the debates in Parliament that take place. And I have seen all the questions raised over the years in Indian Parliament, particularly in the post-Cold War period. The questions were basically very petty questions, I would say, like the number of fishermen they were arrested, so crossing the naval border. That doesn't have any implication on building the naval infrastructure. It was just out of the concern that it could create some kind of a bad influence on our relationship with our immediate neighbors. So from that political angle, these questions were raised. Hardly, if you go to the Parliament library, and it is available online as well, if you go through the maritime debates or issues related to maritime questions, you could see that hardly, till 2000, I think the attack from the 2008 attack that came, terrorist attack that came through the sea lanes. After that, there was more questions were raised in Indian Parliament about infrastructure build-up. What is the government's position on building infrastructure, building the surveillance system of Indian Navy? Before that, questions were very minor. So this is a very important area of research, I think, to study how our Parliament debates the issues related to our Indian Navy. The next important domestic route is, of course, the infrastructure building. And I think, as our Rear Admiral was speaking, in the post-independence period, 1950s, just immediate after independence, we tried to focus on our Navy, but somehow our focus went away. Because the modernization, the Coast Guard modernization, shipbuilding, port modernization, all these issues were coming to the forefront only from the 80s. So 60s, 70s, we were more concerned about our continental security, about the attacks and wars that were coming from China or Pakistan. I think that if those wars were coming, or those attacks would have been coming from the sea routes, probably from that time onwards we would have been looking at building naval infrastructure more in a focused manner. The other one, which I always feel is a very important source of our foreign policy or maritime policy, is public perception. Public perception, what is our public opinion? You see, public opinion about Navy, there is hardly any impression that what a Navy is, how important Navy is, how important our naval officers are. There is perception, early years, their perception was about, it is a trade line. Sea routes is a trade line. It's not for the commoners. Then during British period, there was perception that sea lanes means about Kala Pani, deportation. So the sea, the idea of sea was an idea of fear in the public perception. These days also, people do not have a very good perception of sea, how important the sea lanes are. We are a country surrounded by such sea lanes. The Parulekar sir was talking about the kilometer maritime boundaries. So I think public perception generation is also an important aspect of Indian Navy officers, or in the policy domain. They must focus on these things. Coming back specifically to the post-Cold War period, I think that in the post-Cold War period we had some coalition governments till 1998. Because from 1998, the NDA-1 government, there the first maritime, focused maritime doctrine, maritime naval infrastructure building was started. Why? Because this coalition government in 1998 was a coalition, but a stable one. Before that, there was coalition government were breaking. There was a minority government. So we could see from 91 we had this low-cost policy. Then we had our security needs were there. But from NDA-1 government, there was specific focus on modern technology, maritime capacity building. Yes, it is true that in 1990s, early 1990s, we started Milan exercise, but that was not creating international attention. It was not bringing international attention like it is doing now. I think, as I was saying, that we also have a maritime boundary delineation between our immediate neighbors, and also we had a setback with Bangladesh because this international tribunal made their verdict in favor of Bangladesh in delineating one maritime boundary issue. The idea of net security provider, of maritime net security provider, it emerged during the UPA regime, but again, as I was saying, 2008 being the a very crucial year of our proactiveness or our engagement with the maritime sphere. But during the UPA regime, it was also circumscribed by this internal politics of the coalition and going much forward with the United States in developing maritime infrastructure. But I do feel that in the last 10 years, there have been much more proactiveness in building India's naval capacity, thinking and bringing to the public perception that yes, national power is not only about having a big military, it is also, it's a conjoint power, conjoint of the air, land and navy. So this idea is slowly and gradually emerging, and I think that this strategic foresight of the present political leadership, and not only the Prime Minister but also the Defense Minister, the Foreign Minister, the Home Minister, and the strategic the strategic personnels, those who are making these policy doctrines, they focus on this. They are also talking about this rule-based maritime order. So this rule-based maritime order is linking our internal domestic democratic political infrastructure or ideas with the idea of democratic rule-based sea lanes of communication.